Rhode Island is the smallest state in America by far. This means it also has a very small population of just 1.1 million people. Despite its size though, this population is smaller than you might expect, especially given that the state is crammed into an otherwise very dense region of the country. So why is Rhode Island the runt of New England? To start, let's get right to the whole size thing. Rhode Island may be the smallest state in the United States, but it exists within one of the most geographically interesting regions of the country. Situated along the Atlantic coast in southern New England, its physical geography has long played a central role in its human settlement, economic patterns, and identity, both within the state and across the broader region. Of course, the state is defined by its intimate relationship with water. In fact, over 33% of Rhode Island's total area is water, giving rise to its nickname, the Ocean State. This also makes it the state with the second most amount of ocean relative to its size. Hawaii, of course, comes in first place. Its southern boundary lies along the Atlantic Ocean, with Narragansett Bay cutting deeply into the mainland, creating a series of coves, inlets, islands, and natural harbors. The bay cuts so deeply into Rhode Island that it almost splits the state in half. The northern end of the bay, near the city of Pawtucket, is just 1.5 miles from the Massachusetts border. Within the bay is over 30 islands, the largest of which, Aquidneck Island, is home to the city of Newport. This network of estuaries and coastal plains provided natural shelter for early settlements and continues to support fisheries, boating industries, and maritime culture, something that was crucially important during the early days of colonization. Overall, Rhode Island's coastline is surprisingly diverse. Some stretches feature rocky bluffs and outcroppings, remnants of glacial activity, while others are long, sandy beaches shaped by the constant motion of tides and storms. These coastal landforms are geologically young, formed primarily during the last ice age, when retreating glaciers carved valleys, deposited moraines, and left behind kettle ponds and outwash plains that would later define the landscape of southern New England. But while the coastline certainly defines much of Rhode Island, the state has land as well. Not a lot, mind you, but certainly enough. All told, Rhode Island is the smallest state in the country by far, with only about 1,000 square miles of land. This would make it about half the size as the next largest, Delaware, which has almost 2,000 square miles. In fact, Rhode Island is so small that you could fit it within the largest state, Alaska, about 570 times. Much of this land consists of gently rolling hills, far different from Vermont or Maine's more mountainous terrain. But what it lacks in topography, it makes up for in rivers. The Blackstone River, for example, runs through the northern part of the state into Massachusetts and played a key role in launching America's Industrial Revolution with the early use of water power for textile mills. The Pawtuxet and Woonasquatucket rivers also flow through central Rhode Island, joining the intricate system that shaped both ecological and industrial development in the region. New England as a whole shares many of Rhode Island's physical features. Its coastline is similarly jagged and rich in natural harbors, stretching from the sandy capes of Massachusetts to the rocky peninsulas of Maine. Inland, the Appalachian Mountains begin to rise, particularly in New Hampshire and western Massachusetts, forming the spine of the northern New England landscape. Glacial activity shaped the entire region, giving it thousands of lakes, rivers, and an irregular coastline. Forests dominate much of New England, including Rhode Island, where oak, hickory, and maple trees are common. The same can be said for the state's climate. Rhode Island falls squarely within the humid continental zone, with cold winters and warm, humid summers. However, its coastal position moderates extreme temperatures, especially in the southern parts of the state. Storms, including hurricanes and nor'easters, are a regular part of life along the coast and can significantly reshape the shoreline. In this way, Rhode Island is quite similar to nearby Massachusetts and Connecticut. But what's unique about Rhode Island from its New England siblings is how it even became a state in the first place. You know, we've been talking all about how Rhode Island is this small state with a surprisingly small population, especially when you compare it to its neighbors. It's almost like, despite its location, it manages to stay a bit more private. But in today's digital world, you might not be so private. Did you know that your personal data, your address, phone numbers, age, and even relatives is being sold online by data brokers? It's a huge problem. And it means anyone can potentially buy your personal details. That's why I use Delete Me, the sponsor of today's video. They're a no-hassle subscription service that removes your personal information that's being sold online. Here's a Delete Me report. It's wild to see how many sites they've removed data from. This is like having a team of privacy experts constantly working to protect my online presence. And they can be yours too. Oh, and here's the really cool part. Delete Me isn't just about removing data once. They monitor sites and repeat the removal process as needed all year long. They believe in your right to manage and remove your own personal data. I trust them to help me protect myself from the risks that come with my data being out there. And removing your data will help you protect yourself from the risks of things like identity theft or even stalking. If you want to take back control of your privacy and protect your personal data, then you need Delete Me. Go to joindeleteme.com/GeoByGeoff and use promo code GeoByGeoff at checkout to get 20% off all consumer plans. Just scan the QR code or click the link in the description below and start protecting yourself right now. Rhode Island is an unusual state to say the least, mostly because it's so small, and it's this quirk that has framed much of it throughout its history. But of course, long before European settlers arrived, the area that would become Rhode Island was home to several indigenous tribes, most notably the Narragansett, Wampanoag, and Niantic tribes. The Narragansett tribe in particular played the biggest role in Rhode Island's indigenous history. In fact, the Narragansett people allied with the New England colonists in the Picot War of 1637, but ultimately left the alliance after the Mystic Massacre left the tribe angry at the colonists' brutality. Speaking of colonists, Rhode Island's formal colonial history actually began as a refuge rather than a money-making endeavor. In 1636, Roger Williams, a Puritan minister who had been banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony for his unorthodox religious views, fled southward and established a settlement called Providence on land purchased from the Narragansett. Williams envisioned a place where religious freedom was not just tolerated, but celebrated, an idea that stood in stark contrast to the religious uniformity of its Puritan neighbors. Other dissenters followed, founding additional settlements in what would become Rhode Island, including Portsmouth and Newport. These communities were among the earliest in North America to actively embrace the separation of church and state. And unlike many other colonies, Rhode Island was not formed from a royal charter imposed from above. Instead, its early settlements were founded independently, often by marginalized or exiled individuals, and later united under a charter granted in 1663. That charter, issued by King Charles II, granted an unusual degree of self-governance and explicitly protected religious liberty. It remained in force well into the 1800s and reflected the colony's distinct origins, something that continues to help Rhode Island stand apart from both Massachusetts and Connecticut. Rhode Island's independence streak continued during the American Revolution. It was the first of the 13 colonies to renounce its allegiance to the British Crown in 1776. Yet, ironically, it was also the last to ratify the US Constitution, holding out until 1790 due to concerns about federal power infringing on individual and state rights. Clearly, Rhode Islanders are opinionated if nothing else. In the early 1800s, Rhode Island became one of the cradles of the American Industrial Revolution. Powered by the swift-moving rivers of the Blackstone Valley, textile mills began springing up across the northern part of the state. Samuel Slater, an English immigrant who brought British textile technology to America, built the nation's first successful water-powered cotton spinning mill in Pawtucket in 1793. This launched a wave of industrial development that would shape the economy of Rhode Island and of New England more broadly. Despite its economic growth, however, Rhode Island's political system kept it from similar growth seen by its neighbors. By the 1840s, its outdated colonial charter still limited voting rights to landowners, disenfranchising much of the growing urban working class, and thus limited migration to the state. This led to the Dorr Rebellion of 1841, a failed attempt to reform the political system. While the Dorr Rebellion did fail, it eventually pressured the state into adopting a new constitution that expanded voting rights. Throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, Rhode Island remained an industrial powerhouse, despite its small size. Its cities, Providence, Pawtucket, Woonsocket, were dense centers of manufacturing, drawing waves of immigrants from Ireland, Italy, French Canada, and Eastern Europe. But by the mid-1900s, deindustrialization began to take a toll on Rhode Island. Many factories closed or moved, and with them went thousands of jobs. While some parts of the state have rebounded with higher education, healthcare, and tourism, especially in cities like Providence and Newport, Rhode Island never really returned to its peak industrial prosperity. Today, Rhode Island is still defined by its founding ideals. It remains one of the most religiously diverse and politically independent-minded states in the country. But despite its small size overall, it also has a very small population. Something that's quite unusual given the population density of New England as a whole. At first glance, Rhode Island, with 1.1 million people, seems like it should be just as populous as its New England neighbors. It shares the same temperate climate, coastal access, and proximity to major metropolitan areas. It also has a dense web of historic towns with a strong background in industry and education. On top of all this, the state is only about an hour's drive from Boston, 3 hours from New York City, and connected to both by Amtrak's only high-speed rail line, the Acela. For all these reasons, you would think that Rhode Island would have more people. So why doesn't it? Well, at least part of the answer is simple geographic math. Rhode Island is tiny. At just over 1,000 square miles of land, it's the smallest US state by far. You could fit Rhode Island into its neighbor, Connecticut, nearly 5 times, and into Massachusetts, about 7. It's also worth pointing out that both of those states are also pretty small. So Rhode Island does have a size problem, but its physical size only explains so much. After all, if Rhode Island were as densely populated as some parts of neighboring states, it could easily support more people. The real answer here lies in a blend of geography, history, economics, and even political structure. Geographically, Rhode Island is coastal and fragmented. Over 33% of its total area is water, and much of the remaining land is defined by peninsulas, bays, and islands. This creates a natural beauty defined by the ocean, but it also limits continuous land development. More to that point, Narragansett Bay cuts deep into the state, meaning transportation and infrastructure must navigate around water. While this made for excellent maritime trade in earlier centuries, it now limits expansion and complicates urban sprawl compared to the broader, flatter inland regions of Connecticut or the Boston metro region. But also, historically, Rhode Island developed differently from its siblings. Unlike Massachusetts, which centered much of its early growth around Boston, or Connecticut with its proximity to New York City, Rhode Island didn't consolidate around a single dominant metro region until way later in its existence. Instead, as it grew through the 1800s, it was more of a constellation of small towns and mid-sized cities: Providence, Pawtucket, Warwick, Woonsocket, none of which grew large enough to define the region in its early days. This gets a little complicated today because Providence definitely has national prominence, but the city itself is still quite small at only about 190,000 people. Economically, Rhode Island also faced unique challenges. The state industrialized early and rapidly, with mill towns that once pulsed with economic activity, but it also deindustrialized early and hard. As factories closed throughout the 1900s, well before states like Ohio and New York, cities like Pawtucket and Woonsocket struggled with population loss, declining infrastructure, and underinvestment. This differed from Massachusetts, which pivoted quickly and successfully to industries like education, biotech, and finance, largely anchored by Boston. Meanwhile, Rhode Island's economic reinvention has been slower and more uneven. Connecticut, while also losing industry, retained strong financial centers around Stamford and Hartford due to its proximity to New York City. These economic headwinds made Rhode Island less attractive to large-scale in-migration. In fact, for much of the late 1900s, the state saw minimal net growth, with some years even seeing more out-migration than in-migration. While the state has recently started to reverse that trend, thanks in part to revitalizing urban core in Providence and its appeal as a quieter and cheaper alternative to Boston, the numbers still lag well behind either Connecticut or Massachusetts. Today, Rhode Island is home to only about 1.1 million people, which is significantly less than Connecticut's 3.7 million and Massachusetts' 7.1 million. Within Rhode Island, the state is home to a few mid-sized cities, none of which would be considered major. This would be led by Providence with 190,000 people, followed by Cranston, Warwick, and Pawtucket, each with about 80,000 people. And in terms of metropolitan areas, well, because Rhode Island is so small, it only has one, Providence. And the Providence metro area is home to about 1.6 million people, more than the state of Rhode Island itself. This is because the metro area includes all of Rhode Island, as well as a significant portion of southern Massachusetts. It's just one more weird quirk of America's smallest state. Rhode Island is small in both size and population. This makes it the runt of New England, by far. Still, the state seems to lean into its unique geographic traits rather than hide from them. And this means that Rhode Island is probably one of the best known states in the entire country. This week, I'm heading to the Great Australian Outback to experience one of Australia's weirdest towns, Coober Pedy, which is largely underground. So go check out that video over on my travel channel. Thanks again to our sponsor, Delete Me. To get your data removed from the internet, check out the link in the description or scan this QR code and get 20% off. As always, I hope you enjoyed learning all about Rhode Island. If you did, be sure to check out this video all about why Indiana is the runt of the Great Lakes states. Thanks for watching. See you next time.